Shift Yourself Media.
Hi, I'm Tom Pitt from Shift Yourself Media, and I've made the world's cheapest VETTEKART. So I guess a little bit of an introduction is in order, because this thing's a lot to take in all at once. It's a 1987 Corvette, and when I got it, it was just a frame and some quarter panels. I kept putting parts on until I could drive it. This car is a barrel of monkeys to drive, and it's definitely a conversation piece. It turns heads everywhere it goes. I call it the cheap Corvette, and pretty good reason for that, so we'll get into some of it. Obviously, this thing is pretty Spartan and a little bit sloppy, but that's okay. It was kind of put together that way. Like I said, I just put parts together until I could drive it. I do get a lot of questions about the car. I've taken it to a car show, drive it around town sometimes. A lot of people ask, is that thing even street legal? Well, in Kentucky, it sure is. It's got headlights, starts, stops, and steers, brake lights, and turn signals. You don't need much else. Oh, it's got a license plate with a license plate light. So to get to the bottom of how this thing came to be, we have to go away from this car and up to another C4. Well, here's the other C4, and obviously this thing is completely juiced. It's been stripped down from pretty much anything that I'd ever want off this car, and this thing's getting ready to go to scrap. But it started out when I bought this, and it didn't look like this. It was actually a complete car, and I had aspirations of titling it and driving it. So whenever I went to get the paperwork, come to find out, it already had a title in Florida. So let me break down how that works. The car had a clear title in Florida. Owner in Florida sold it to a guy in Georgia. Guy in Georgia bought it, didn't register it with the title, but just did a bill of sale. I guess it was cheaper. Bill of sale is legal to register a car in Georgia if it's 84. And this one's an 84 or older. And then he sold it to a friend of mine in Kentucky. He sold it with the bill of sale. Well, when my friend had it and he sold it to me, it was his legally, but in the eyes of the Commonwealth of Kentucky, couldn't transfer it because it still had an active title in Florida. And I guess technically, currently, it does still have an active title in Florida. And I guess it will until it's crushed. So how do we go from there to here? Well, once I couldn't get a title on the other car, I began the nefarious task of finding a car with a title and maybe buying the title from it. Now, it didn't work out that way, but in my search, I did find a car that was just a frame, some quarter panels, and a windshield, and a title. This one. When I got it, it was a little nothing. So for $320, I became the proud new owner of a Corvette frame and title. And that was it. But the other car made for a really good donor for the front suspension, the rear suspension, and a few other picky things that I needed. The engine was sourced from a 2000 Silverado. It's 5.3 liter. I kept the truck accessories, kept the truck intake, everything but the truck oil pan. I got a Firebird oil pan, an LS1, and actually I was able to use the flex plate that came on the engine because it had holes drilled for it already. The lower radiator hose for the car was the same, despite the engine, so I just bought a new one. The upper radiator hose, however, came out of a Lincoln Mark 8. For the intake, from the filter up to the throttle body, I went to Menards, got some 2.5-inch PVC, and a couple of connectors, painted it black, put it together. For transmission, I actually used the one that came out of the old Corvette. It had pretty low miles, 700 R4, and so it doesn't really like the 5.3 very much, and I had to put together some sort of cable apparatus. That's why it's held on with locking pliers. So it's not quite the way it's supposed to be. It shifts a little bit soft, but I'm going to replace the transmission anyways with a 4L60. On this truck intake, I blocked off the EGR with a cap from throttle body cleaner. Just wrapped some black tape around it, put it in there, used some epoxy putty to cap off the evap, and we don't have any leaks on it. I'm not running a heater core because, well, obviously it wouldn't do any good. So I used a little U-pipe to go right in its place. For exhaust, I used cheapo Amazon.com headers. Found those on Amazon Warehouse. So they were used, They were never put on a car, they were unboxed. And so I ordered those, about $100 in them. Then I bought a 90-degree pipe, cut it in half, so I had two 45s, and welded them to the flange on each one, and put a piece of flex pipe after that. From the flex pipe, it goes into an absolutely straight piece of pipe that goes around in front of the back wheel. Then I ran two self-tapping screws, one through the pinch weld, and one through the exhaust pipe to hold the construction strap so that we can hold the pipe up. Obviously the wiring on this is an absolute circus. It's not done, but it is functional. And so I've got the ECM and the fuse box from the truck donor that I used, and I've got a GPS speedometer that works. I've got my little data link connector to hook scan tool up, and then I've got an instrument cluster that I made out of just a piece of metal and put some digital gauges in it. Yeah, eventually I'll get the wires all cleaned up, but that's not something I'm really worried about right now. Now, car shows, I do get a lot of hate and a lot of questions about the wheels on this thing. They're 22-inch IROCs. I love them. Question is, though, doesn't that rub? Well, hell yeah, it rubs. Look. Why wouldn't it rub? Why wouldn't you think it would? And they stick out about 1.5 inches from the body. It does rub, but it's not really that bad. Not enough to wear down on the tires. Besides, this thing's plastic anyway. A lot of folks told me, hey, why don't you put smaller wheels on it? And I say, hey, why don't you shut up? It's my car. They're not cutting into the tires, so it's not really a big deal. You'd never know about looking at the thing, but this car has actually been through the National Corvette Museum experience in Bowling Green. And so what that is, they take the car, they give it a nice detail, and they give it a photo sesh right out in front of the National Corvette Museum. Obviously not when I was in possession of this vehicle. Overall, this is a purpose-built vehicle. And here's the purpose. I built this to take to car shows and really get all the goats. Get the goats of the Corvette purists. And that's what it does. They have to stand in line to hate this thing. And that's okay, because the line to hate the cheap Corvette is long, varied, and forms to the right. But really, it runs good, drives pretty good, handles good, starts, steers, and stops, just like a car should. And if it looks like it was cobbled together in just a couple of months in a shop next to somebody's house, that's because it was. And if you've got a normal looking Corvette at a car show, understand, I don't hate you. I just think it's funny that somebody walks past your $60,000 Grand Sport to look at this thing that I cobbled together for about $1,200. This car is a few things: cheap, light, fun, and interesting. And just because I love you, here's a startup video. There's not much more to it. That's the story of the world's cheapest Corvette go-kart. Check out my store for cheap merch. And follow on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and the YouTube.
Shift Yourself Media.